Pete Newberg joins me here today. You can learn what his team is up to by vpmsolutions.com. vpmsolutions.com. I'm going to have that as a clickable link in the show notes. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because I'm sure you've told this story a billion times over, but let's start with how you found your way into real estate and then how you found your way into virtual assistants with real estate.
Yeah. So interesting story. I think many of your listeners can relate to this, where you're told when you're a kid, go get a good job and then go to a good school, get a good education, get a good job. I went to a mediocre school, got a mediocre job, a mediocre salary. And I never thought that I was intelligent enough or smart enough to own a business. Even though I was around business owners growing up, I just never assumed that. And I just assumed like, I'm just going to go ahead and be a W-2 employee the rest of my life. And after about 5 years of doing it, I realized, man, I need to do something different. And again, didn't think I can do the whole owning a business thing, which is kind of funny because I've bought and sold two of them now. But I ended up saying, you know what? I can learn about real estate. So around when I was 31 years old, I bought my first duplex and an 100-unit apartment complex I was a passive investor in on the same day. So I got into real estate by finding, you got to remember, this is early 2000s. I found a local investing club and they taught me how to, how to buy real estate. Kiyosaki's book had just come out. I read it. It was like a Bible. And then the organization really helped me buy my first few properties. And that's how I got into real estate.
So you obviously had a need yourself then regarding virtual assistants. Is that how that came into play?
Yeah. So we'll fast forward a couple of years and I found a business partner named Steve. And Steve and I decided that our vision was going to buy 500 single family homes, which sounds crazy now, but that was our vision. And we got to about 31 and we realized, holy crap, managing these properties is really very, very difficult, especially the type of property we're buying. We're buying Class C, Class D single family homes here in Houston, Texas. And we were stepping on each other's toes. He would call a resident, I'd call a resident. He'd call maintenance guy, I'd call maintenance guy. And we had no structure. So we decided to build a better mousetrap and we created Empire Industries, which was our property management firm. And so we took that and in 2012, we started that. And about 2013, I realized, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And I luckily found a local, not a local chapter of a national organization called NARPM, National Association of Residential Property Managers. That organization really was super helpful in having us learn how to actually run the operational side of the business. We also hired a business coach. His name is Doug Winnie with Action Coach. And he helped us on the business side of things, the marketing, the sales, and the structure of the business. We took that company.
Yeah, I can hear you.
We met another guy named Doug Winnie with Action Coach International. He was our business coach and he helped us with the sales, the marketing, and basically the infrastructure of building a business. NARPM helped us with the operational stuff. We ended up going from 31 homes. We started third party managing and we started managing homes. We got to over 984 homes in 3 markets. And as I was building the business, I realized that in order to be profitable, it was hard to find really good talent local. There's this thing called traffic. If you remember before 2020, everybody had this thing called an office and we expected everybody to go to this office.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't find people that lived, people didn't want to move like, or go to work for us that lived more than 20, 30 minutes away. Traffic in Houston is really terrible. And so we were very limited to the type of person that we could hire. And also when I did find somebody for the amount that the job role was supposed to pay, folks just didn't want to work for that. So what I was getting is I was getting people with really not too many other options. So I wasn't really picking from the brightest bunch, so to speak. And I had people who had challenges outside the business and they would bring those challenges inside my business. For example, car keeps breaking down or there's baby mama drama. And so what we found is we can find people in Central America, Mexico, Philippines for a fraction of the cost. Matter of fact, I could hire about 3 people for every 1 person in the States. They were already working remote. They understood how to work remote. It reduced my financial burden tremendously as far as employer taxes and PTO, things of that nature. And I was able to find people who were bilingual, people who were college educated, and I was able to pay them more than what they can make in their local market. So for example, you got to remember, this is back in like 2016, 2017. I was paying somebody in Mexico $7 an hour. That was more than they make. Today, inflation has hit the whole world. Today, that same person is about $10 an hour. But the same person in the US, in Houston anyway, might be $50,000, $60,000 a year. And so not only were we able to find more people because we're picking from a global basket, we're able to find what I would think better qualified people. So from there, I was able to reduce my expenses because your number one expense is people. Number two was the office thing. And so I was able to reduce my expenses from 56% of my revenue down to about 34% of revenue. And every dollar saved is a dollar earned. And I was also able to give better customer satisfaction. My customer satisfaction went up. Our churn rate went down. And all because we were able to answer the phone. Because remember, I have 3 people now instead of 1. And so we were able to go from a reactionary company to a proactive company. And our clients loved it. They ended up giving us more referrals. They ended up giving us more business. And so our revenue would increase and our expenses stayed the same because I was able to handle more business. And so that's what I do today is try to help, especially property managers, but anybody in the real estate industry leverage remote team members that can help them increase their profit. And of course, helping people around the world, get jobs for the US companies.
There's a lot of things to unpack here regarding these remote team members. Let's start with the management of them to begin with. I would imagine you are touching base on a regular basis, and there's probably some key performance indicators that you're tracking to make sure that they're producing at the level you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And great observation. The first thing is when people hear that they can find a virtual team member, a remote team member, or a virtual assistant, and they hear how cheap it is, they just say, I want one, right? I want somebody. And Jack, the first thing you have to do is you have to determine what it is that person is going to do, right? If you don't know the job description, and if you have a job description that says answer phones and then all other duties assigned by management, that's not a job description. And so the more detailed you are with what they're supposed to do, then they know what they're supposed to do. You should have a hiring process. Whether you hire in remote or you're hiring somebody in the office, the process is about the same. The only difference would be making sure that the person who's remote has good microphones, good computer, good internet connection. Other than that, everything else should be the same, right? You should ask culture questions. You should ask your personality profile type questions, and you should find out if they have the ability to be coachable. Those are the main things. Once you hire them, now you have to train them. I'm a big fan of the book, The 1 Minute Manager. And in that book, they talk about spending a lot of time with your new person up front. And then over time, you allow that person to kind of manage themselves. So you ask like redirecting questions. So anytime we hire a new team member, whether it's remote or it's US based, we spend a lot of time with them up front daily, training them. And then once they're trained up, most positions in property management and real estate can be trained within 2 to 3 weeks. Most of them. There are some that take a little bit longer, but whenever you have less decision points, then the training is much easier. The more decision points, the bigger the training. Once you have the training, then you have your management piece of it. The management piece should be a weekly meeting. It should have an agenda, right? So I'm a big EOS guy. If you're familiar with Traction, the book Traction by Gino Wickman, I'm a big fan of his. So you have structure. And the first thing is you feel good. The second thing is your KPI review. Now, I teach a whole thing on KPIs, so I won't go too much into it. You have to have the right KPIs. And if you have the right KPIs, then you should have about 1 to 3 per job role. If you have 11 KPIs like I did when I first started, everything is important, so nothing is important. And so reviewing the KPIs and try to refrain from asking why, right? Ask what questions. What can we do to hit the KPI? Or what did you do that, what can we do to hit the KPI moving forward? Makes you start thinking ownership, accountability, responsibility. So once you have the structure, so when I first had my virtual team members, I was actually the guy that trained them on board, the first batch. And then I managed them. And then eventually I had a team in the US that would actually manage them. And they spent time training them, and then they spent time managing them. And that's how it worked. And so then when you do that, the main thing is start asking those redirection questions. Because if you are the superhero, I had a case of superhero-itis once for a while, Jack, where nothing got done in my company because everybody's waiting on me to give them the answer. With the 1 Minute Manager book, I learned over time the redirect questions. Well, what do you like? How do we do this? Well, what do you think we should do? If I wasn't around, what would you do? You get them to think. And over time, it takes about 90 days that maybe the first 90 days, 60 or 80% of everything is escalated. Then after 90 days, it goes down to maybe that 80-20 rule. And so 20% stuff gets escalated, you redirect them. It's a training opportunity. And if you can hire somebody that can do it at 80% as good as you, then that's a win. And so when I ended up hiring somebody, like, yeah, I was a maintenance coordinator before I was, the CEO. No one could do maintenance coordinator as good as me. I train you, you do it almost as good as me. And then a year later, guess what? You're doing it better than me. And everybody ended up hiring. They ended up doing all those positions better than I could have, especially when I was spread out thin. So if you're listening to this and you're wearing multiple hats in your company, if you're an investor and you're the one that's funding the deals, making the offers, running the comps, doing the SEO, doing the marketing, and working full time, I promise you, none of that is going to be doing real well for you. So that's how we did it.
I would imagine that you're getting a lot of people, like you said, they hear that number, they think it's really cheap. I need one of those things. But let's take a step back and talk about the low-hanging fruit. What are the most common activities a first-timer should approach when
Yeah, so it's gonna
considering?
gonna depend on the what they do, right? So, for example, I'm a big property management guy because I ran a company for 9 years as property management, and the number one job that we see for property managers is maintenance coordinator, followed by leasing coordinator, followed by executive administrator. So those are kind of the 3 big ones. On the real estate side, I see transaction coordinator and I see appointment setter. For real estate investor, it's appointment setter and executive assistant. So those are the ones that we see pretty often. And then there's probably only about, I don't know, 20 to 25 different types of jobs in the industry that we're finding. I have 52 job descriptions on our website. So if you do go to vpmsolutions.com, you can see all the different job descriptions. We do have KPIs and DISC on those job descriptions. So if you're interested and you're not sure what somebody can do, you can go to check those out for free.
Okay. Well, let's just point everybody there quick. vpmsolutions.com, vpmsolutions.com. If you found some value in what we're talking about so far, do us a quick favor, share this with one of your investor friends. And if you're watching us on YouTube, a quick like and subscribe really helps the algorithm there. So, Pete, let's talk about the business aspect of this a little bit, because you said you've sold 2 companies now?
No, I sold the one company and I started a second company. So I
Okay.
sold Empire and then took a job with Mind Management, was an Eastern Region Vice President there. And then I did the startup for VPM. So started 2 companies, sold the one company.
Is there a reason you decided to sell?
I had a business partner. He and I's vision did no longer align. And we felt that it was best. We couldn't buy each other out once we got the offer because the offer was really strong. So we decided, let's go ahead and sell. We are still very close friends today. I think, by selling, we saved the friendship and the relationship. He is not part of the new business. I'm not part of his new business, but we're on each other's boards and we kind of help each other out.
Okay. So is there anything in hindsight you would have done differently when starting that business?
When I started the business, I had no idea that property management existed. To be honest with you, I thought I created a single family property management business. I had owned a few apartment complexes at the time, and I hung out with a lot of multifamily guys. And of course, I knew multifamily property management. And when I told them I was going to do single family to a man, they're like, that's hard. That's a lot of windshield time. You can never do that. You can never scale that. And I think sometimes ignorance is bliss, didn't really believe them. I just had this belief and I had a need really because I owned so many single family properties at the time and I just did it. There was tons of learnings that I had there. I'll say the number one learning is your pipeline or your top of funnel or whatever marketing term you want to use. Marketing is the lifeblood of your company. I am not a growth guy. I'm actually an operations guy, which is kind of funny that I'm sitting here on the podcast because I'm the face of the new company, VPM, but I'm actually an operations guy. I love operations. I'm a big fan of it. And I think that if you have the perfect operations, then you'll reduce churn and you can grow the company, right? However, if you don't have the marketing and the sales, you might get like 10 clients. It'll be perfect, but you'll have like 10 clients. So I learned early on that we needed to invest in marketing. And I was one of the first property management firms to actually hire like a full-time marketing person in our organization. So we learned that pretty quick from our business coach. So that was a learning.
We're not recording. Let me hit pause.
When I first started, I let the renters, they paid the landlords directly. Now, if you know anything about property management, they're supposed to pay you. You're supposed to be in control of the money, and then you take your management fee out, and then you pay the investor. And we were like the low end guys. So like it was like we were like $50 a month. It was like we were the cheapest guys in the city. And it was so cheap that people didn't realize like, oh, it's such a cheap fee that I'm not going to take the time to actually write a check back to my property management firm. So I had all this outstanding money from all my clients because they wouldn't pay me. And then we were taking the maintenance and we were solving the maintenance for them and then asking for money for the maintenance. It was very, very difficult business. I mean, accounting wise, it was crazy. We then turned it in that we're going to collect the rent. So that's something that I probably would have done right from the beginning is we collect the rent, always have different, no commingling of funds. So that goes to the management fee. So if I was negative with the management company, I would not take from the rentals that came in. That was a big learning for us.
You mentioned disc profile when it comes to these positions. Is that something you do when vetting out your staff?
100%. So I'm a huge fan of personality profile. For me personally, it's not the only thing, but if you don't have the right disc and you have no experience, you're disqualified. We won't hire you, right? If you have the wrong disc, but you have like 20 years, I mean, obviously you figured it out. So we're going to go ahead and look into that person a little bit more closely. So, look, we're recording this in February. By now, most people have gone off their New Year's resolutions. I truly believe like if somebody wants a job, they'll say anything to get the job because they need money, right? But let's say, for example, and this happened to me, I had an accounting position open early on. And a lady came in, interviewed for the accounting position. She was a high I in the disc profile, which is basically, without knowing much about the disc, it's just the complete opposite of what an accountant is. 100% opposite, not even close. And she told me she loved accounting. She had very little experience in accounting. And I just never believed that somebody who's in high I, who's the opposite, would love accounting. So we ended up hiring the high C, which is the perfect personality profile for the accountant. And it worked out for us. I'm not 100%. It's obviously only one factor, but we have reduced our churn on team or reduced the bad hire, I would say, by implementing DISC into our hiring process.
I haven't run into a lot of people who go through that level to find the right fit.
And that's why they probably have bad hires and they probably, telling you, oh, virtual assistants don't work, right? Because they hired one person one time and they had a bad experience. I'm actually reading this new book called Hiring for Attitude. Mark Murphy is the author on it. And so I'm a huge fan of how can I take as much subjectivity out of hiring as possible. So for example, we have a 10-point scoring system. So when we hire, if you wanted to use VPM to hire, you can use VPM for free to find people, get matched up and hire them and pay them through our platform. All that's free. We make money. We make 10% from the VA side, but we do a 10-point scoring system, right? And so every piece of it, we try to say, okay, how can we mathematically give a score to English proficiency, right? Have an English test, internet speed, have an internet speed test, disc profile, right? If it's 2 of the 3, or if it's 1 of the 3 characteristics, then it gets scored this way. And the last piece that we couldn't really score, so we got 9 of them down. The last piece was core values, attitude, or hiring characteristics, whatever you want to call it, right? And so we're working with this book called Hiring for Attitude. And he basically says, here are some attitudinal questions that you can ask. And here's a scoring sheet on what some of these questions look like, are good answers, bad answers. Here's what you're trying to look for. So we're actually implementing this into our hiring process because if you think about it, in real estate, we are not hiring NASA scientists, data scientists, electrical engineers. We're not hiring this stuff. We're hiring, basically we're hiring low level jobs, right? That's what we hire for. And so you don't really need the high IQ. You don't need the guys that have been doing this for 30 years. But what you do need is the right person who is going to be the right fit for your organization through your core values, your culture, your characteristics. Then you need to know what that person's supposed to do, right? So that gives them a ticket to get on the boat. Did I lose you again? I'm sorry.
No, I still hear you.
Okay. All right. So I'll start again. All right. So that gives me the ticket to get on the boat, right? So now I know I have the right person in my organization, but now I have to put them in the right seat. By having the hiring for attitude, and if I can really dial that in and I get the right person in the boat, that is half the battle. Having a really good job description is the kind of the instructions for the seat on the boat, right? So if I need you to be an accountant, I need you to put you in the accountant seat. Having the disc profile tells me the type of person for that role, right? So are they the right fit for that seat? So now you're on the boat, you have the right seat, you have the instructions, and the KPIs tell me which way to row, right? Okay, so these are the 2 to 3 KPIs that you're ultimately responsible for. We know, and you know, that if you hit those KPIs, the boat's going to go forward, right? The business is going to be successful. And so what I've found as now that I own VPM and I'm dealing with a lot of companies, what I've found is most companies have a process for freaking everything except for hiring. And it's like, what's the most important part of your business? It's probably not the software that we're recording this on. It's probably the people that are working with you at REI that got me on here, that's going to chop this up, that's going to post produce. You know what I mean? Like, there's people is probably your number one asset. And the fact that most people have no idea how to hire, they don't spend any time on it, they don't have a hiring process, and then they don't want to spend any money for somebody to help them hire. And then they make pretty bad decisions. Or they do what I did when I first started. I would post something on Facebook and I would hire friends of friends. And believe me, that sometimes doesn't work out.
You know, there's a couple things there that I was hoping we could touch on. It's kind of interesting. You've niched down into the real estate world when it comes to the virtual assistants. Unfortunately, I've run into quite a few people that just kind of go half-assed into this, and they like the idea of a VA. They think they can do it on their own, and they're trying to get essentially top-notch talent for as little as possible. Can you talk a little bit about why that might be a mistake?
So trying to get top-notch talent for as little as possible. Well, look, at the end of the day, a virtual assistant will leave you for 25 cents more, especially if they're unhappy. So if you are just trying to get top-notch talent and not treat them well, right? Meaning I'm not paying you a bunch, I'm not giving you training, I'm not giving you guidance, I don't treat you like a real person, you're going to lose that person very quickly. I'm a big believer in like what makes great coaches is they know exactly what makes each member of their team tick. But I'm a big fan of I don't like giving people raises just to give them a raise, just for the sake of raise. Always hated the idea of a COLA, cost of living adjustment. When I was in my W-2 job, everybody would get the same rate, even though I worked 80 hours a week and, provided so much more value to the organization. The guy that did bare minimum, you get the same raise as me. And I always thought that was BS. So what I try to do is every job role in my organization has a KPI to it, and we have a bonus structure that connects to the KPI. If you exceed the KPI, then you can build a better bonus structure. But if you're just trying to find somebody who's got a bunch of, I just want to hire somebody who's got a bunch of experience, and then I'm not going to give them any guidance. What'll happen is that person will realize this isn't for me. And the culture thing sounds so kind of quirky and weird and like, like, oh, like it's just like this, kumbaya thing, but it really does matter. It really does matter. Who do you want in the foxhole with you? And if you don't have the right people, and look, somebody who's really good for my company, Jack might be terrible for your organization, right? Because I might be lackadaisical and we're talking about fun. Jack, you might be, super hard ass and like we're, super strict and people, but there are people that would hate working in a carefree, no, environment where nothing, there's no start to end to things. And there might be people who love that.
No.
But just because somebody's a good fit for one company doesn't mean it's a good fit for another.
And what I also think is interesting is that you mentioned that a lot of people spend a lot of time on their processes and procedures and all of that time and money and effort into that, but then don't spend the time on hiring the right people. I kind of give the analogy of we do a lot of house flipping, and we see it all the time where people will spend months and tens of thousands of dollars on flipping a home, but then come in with their cell phone and take photos for the MLS. It's like, why wouldn't you go that extra bit to protect and get top dollar of this asset by investing in something, the marketing piece that really matters here?
What is the old saying? Was that stepping over a quarter to pick up a penny?
Yeah.
I find it very interesting. A lot of people they'll pay for certain things and other things they won't invest the money into. Marketing always comes up. Like marketing is just like not going to spend money on marketing. It's not called spending money, it's called investing money in marketing, especially if you do it correctly. And I think another thing, especially when it comes to virtual team members, they feel like, oh, it's a virtual team member. They're all the same. I'm just going to pick somebody and I'm going to give them a checklist to do these things. And I will say the remote team member has evolved, just like business has evolved, just like marketing has evolved. It's evolved. Back in the early 2000s, when you hired a virtual team member, you literally gave them a checklist and they would just do the thing on the checklist, right? Fast forward a few years after that, then they can do like the admin work, right? Fast forward now with us, we started giving them full, like they own the process. So I had somebody at Empire, my property management firm, they literally owned the maintenance process, the turn process, the onboarding process, whatever the process was. At VPM, they own the onboarding process, the gold glove process, the white glove process, the customer service process. They own that. Now, all right, now today, you're seeing C-suiters in virtual assistants, CFOs, CMOs, you're seeing supervisors, managers, you're seeing all sorts of crazy talent in companies at a much, and now they're paying people in Mexico 50, $60,000 a year. But that CFO in Houston would be 130, 140. The evolution of the remote team member has really grown to the point where, you're seeing C-suiters. I don't have any C-suiters in my company just yet, but I have developers. I have people who manage other people at my company. And at Empire, I had people who were in Mexico that supervised people in the US. Think about that, right? I literally had a remote team member managing team members in the United States.
Okay. So you've really done a great job here painting that perfect picture of what a virtual assistant can do to your business. But what are some of the gotchas? You got to give us some red flags.
Yeah. So the big pandemic that's happening right now, whether it's US or remote, is multiple jobs, right? So I know a guy in the US, he's got 4 jobs right now, right? Now, 4 full-time jobs, by the way. So one of the things that you have to be aware of is if somebody is working for you and you want them to work for you full-time, 40 hours a week, then there are some flags that you have to look at, right? So the first thing is, are they available? Availability matters, meaning when we have a meeting, are they on camera and are they office? If they're on camera but they're in Starbucks, that's a no-no. Like you want them in their office, okay? Second thing is, if you Slack them or email them, what's your policy? You should have a communication policy. If I Slack you, you got less than 30 minutes to Slack me back. If I email you, you have less than 2 hours to email me. If I call you, you have less than 10 minutes to call me back. Like there's certain things that we look at. And if somebody is not available, that's a red flag number 1. All right. Red flag number 2 is you get escalations, right? So when you're a property management firm, there's a lot of communication going back and forth, right? Emails, phone calls, both from residents and from our owners and from our team members. So if you start hearing from your clients, I can never get in touch with Antonio, or worse, you hear from your team, I can never get in touch with Antonio, that's a red flag. Right. So availability, number 1, escalations, number 2, and then KPIs, number 3. Jack, you brought up KPIs. I'm a huge believer in it. And I manage by availability, escalations, and then are you hitting your numbers? I really don't care if my team works 40 hours. I pay them 40 hours a week. I really don't care. If they can get their job done in 30 and they're responsible, they're hitting, they're hitting their numbers, they're getting back to everybody, there's no escalations, I don't care. What I find funny, I talk to a lot of people and they're like, they want their virtual team member to literally write down everything they do. Like an end of day, like 5-page summary that they're never going to read. They want them to use like Time Doctor or some other software that takes screen captures of their screen every 30 seconds because they're so worried that this $8 an hour person is going to steal 5-6 hours a week from them. Meanwhile, their $100,000 person comes in late, goes to the water cooler numerous times, takes a coffee break, cigarette break, takes a long lunch break, leaves early. They could give two craps about that guy, but they care about the $8 an hour guy. Just make sure that they're responsive, that no escalations, they're hitting the KPIs. I think you're going to be good.
Well, and the last question I'd have for you is that I would imagine you run into this quite a bit where people are calling you, kicking the tires, trying to get off the fence and actually hire their first virtual assistants. But I would imagine that one of the big mindset shifts there is seeing this individual as an investment versus an expense.
That's a good point. I think a lot of people, especially when they're a solopreneur, that first hire, whether it's US based or virtual based, is a really different mindset. It really is because now you're responsible for somebody else or you have to let go to grow. And all I can tell you as a business owner, the more people I hire, the more my business grows. Of course, there's caveats to it, right? You have to have the right management and all that, hire the right people, all that good stuff that we had talked about. But yeah, you need to see your people as an investment, meaning what are you going to do for you? And then what are you going to do for them? Yeah. Are you going to train them up? Are you going to bonus them when they hit certain milestones? How can you impact their life? And one of the things that I was most proud about with Empire was that I literally built something out of thin air, but I had like 35 people working for me. That was 35 families that we supported, and I thought that was a pretty cool thing. Allows you to actually feel purpose, right? Like, oh wow, this is pretty cool. Like I literally have one person, one family that is literally counting on this business to be profitable or make revenue. So I think that's pretty cool.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, Pete. Before we jump into the rapid fire questions and closing out this episode, is there a topic you wish we would have touched on?
No, man, Jack, I think you asked really great questions, and I hope I answered them correctly. And hopefully your listeners got some value out of this.
Yeah, I'm sure they have. I really appreciate you being so open. But if you're ready, then we'll jump into the rapid fire questions and close out this episode.
Let's do it.
What lie do real estate investors often tell themselves?
Why they tell themselves that the deal is going to work? It's going to be a great deal. They never think about the challenges, especially when you have partners in multifamily. Every time I had a multifamily deal, all we counted was our money. We never looked at all the potential pitfalls. So I think that they just tell themselves that it's all going to be great.
Sure. If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
I'll go back in time and tell my younger investment self because you break your life into many things, and there's thousands of things I want to tell myself. But for this purpose of the REI Mastermind Network podcast, do not just focus on cash flow. Made the mistake. I did not buy so many properties because the cash flow wasn't there. And if I would have done that, I'd have been a multimillionaire today. So don't just buy cash flow. Look at appreciation. Look at all the factors, not just the one factor when evaluating a property.
Do you have a book recommendation?
I'm reading Hiring for Attitude right now, but the book I always recommend is Traction by Gino Wickman.
Yeah, that's a great book. And then finally, what single strategy, process, or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time-saving impact to you or your business?
This is going to be a layup for me, Jack, but it's actually hiring people more importantly, hiring virtual team. And I will tell you, when I hired virtual team, my company went from reactive to proactive. It went from a 34% churn rate down to a 20% churn rate. It went from not profitable to profitable. And it went from the team being super stressed to not being super stressed. And it allowed me personally to level up from being in the weeds and being the operator to being the CEO. And when I sold my business, I was working about 4 hours a day. Before that, I was working 80 hours a week. So hiring remote team members.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, Pete. I really appreciate you being here. One last time, vpmsolutions.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes, but I hope you consider coming back sometime. It was great meeting you.
Well, let's do it again sometime, Jack.